So over to you, Hayley.
Thank you, Noz. Thank you very much. I'm Hayley, as Noz has mentioned, Hayley Farrell. I lead the wellbeing strategy for EMCOR UK. Who we are, we're an integrated facilities management company with 4,500 employees across the UK, all the way from Scotland down to Cornwall. We operate in 17,000 buildings, so we're quite dispersed, distributed, a very diverse organisation. We conform at the moment to 8 ISO standards, and I just wanted to highlight that to you because we are in a regulated industry, which is why we are passionate about 45,003. In terms of, before I dive straight into 45,003, I just want to position the role of well-being in our organisation. And we've actually just had a conversation around this in our breakout group, around 45,003, and perhaps aligning it with some of the other strategic objectives within your organisation, such as sustainability, legal requirements, etc. That's exactly what we have done. So back end of last year, we moved wellbeing out of a people role, so out of HR, and it sits alongside safety operations, risk, technical, environment, and sustainability. We work very collaboratively with other parts of the business, as you can see there, HR, operations, supply chain, because really ISO 45,003 should not be an isolated standard, and it shouldn't be the responsibility of one person or one department or one function. It's about understanding the workplace risks to an individual, which hinders them from being able to thrive. And those risks can be across a number of different departments or different areas of the business. So to the question of should you take 45,003 and integrate it with other kind of management standards or management reviews in the organization, that was a question I was asked. I would absolutely say yes. It should be a fundamental part of it. So why well-being for us and why ISO 45,003? So when we initiated our strategy, which is a 5-year strategy, it was underpinned by 27500. 27500 is another ISO standard, which is all around human-centric. So people are at the heart of everything that we do. And that looks at equality, it looks at diversity, it looks at inclusion. When we incorporated this as part of our strategy last year, it was pre-thinking for 45,003. And when we talk about well-being within our organization, we talk about psychological safety. We link it into our organizational DNA, our purpose, our values, and our strategic objectives. Now, our strategic objectives are aligned to global goals, which you can see we've chosen 8, particularly 8 and 10 link into the standard for us. So really just highlighting that 45,003 should not be binary or isolated. It should form part of the bones, which really helps in getting to grips with it because it helps you embed it in the organization. It's not just a tick box or another standard or a voluntary nice to have. In terms of this slide, now on the left-hand side, it's a diagram that I've pulled from What If Your Job Was Good For You report that was launched by BITC probably 3-4 days ago. So I will give the link to Noz to be able to circulate afterwards. But it's a really good report because it looks at 5 enablers to support good work. Peter mentioned he doesn't want to be talking about mental health in a couple of years. How do we integrate mental health and well-being into good, better work practice, better work environments, not just looking at the individual building resilience, but really having a bit of emotional intelligence to say what is the risk in the business and how are we going to collectively overcome it. So we look at the proactive promotional approach of better health and well-being, but then we look at this better work part, which is good work, job design, and psychological safety. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then also the circle on the right, plan, do, check, act. And I've written the clauses there. So earlier, Peter spoke about the clauses in the ISO standard. There you can see that clause 4 to 7 is all about the planning phase. Clause 8 is about the doing, checking is clause 9, and clause 10 is acting. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that now in terms of how we implemented it in our organization. So what and how? For me, it's imperative that you actually understand what the standard means as a whole and what it means to you as an organization. Now, people use the words psychological health and safety and psychosocial risk interchangeably, but they're actually two completely different things. We've touched a bit on psychological safety around, we often refer to people being allowed to bring their whole selves to work. Absolutely. We want to create that culture where they can be authentic, share their mental health and well-being journeys. But ISO 45003 recognizes that it's much more than just that. It's about employee satisfaction, engagement, a sense of purpose, innovation, allowing people to share knowledge. Because in creating an environment where people can do that, it drives compliance, it drives a culture of reporting, and where people can come up with ideas, be innovative and productive and challenge the status quo somewhat without fear of retribution. So when we talk about how do you create a psychologically safe culture, it's employees being able to have a relationship with their manager, to talk about their struggles, but also to say, I don't agree with that. Just as I would say, stop for my physical safety, stop for my mental safety. That is a risk to my mental health because my workload, the demand, the excessive change, the lack of communication, the HSC standards of stress, essentially. So psychosocial risks are the actual work-related hazards that can cause injury and health. Now, there are three areas defined by the standard, which are how work is organized, which is job design, and it looks at the 6 health and safety stress factors. Also talks about social factors at work. Peter touched on connectivity, isolation, relationships, and then it also looks at work environment, equipment, and hazardous tasks. So firstly, understanding those two things is really important. We then conducted a gap analysis. So we took the standard, we put it into an Excel spreadsheet, which ended up being 350 lines. And we tried to map ourselves against this and say, where are our weak spots? I'm pretty critical, if I'm honest, because if you're going to do this, you've got to do it authentically. And you've got to be prepared to go in there and say to the leaders, these are your risks, and this is why we need to improve on certain areas. Now, I've listed there a couple of areas that are covered by the clauses in terms of what you need to look at in terms of psychosocial risks and gap analyze yourselves against. Once you've done that, you can identify action steps to improve. Now, I'm just going to run through a couple of those with you that we've been actively working with over the past couple of months. So the need for leadership commitment needs to sit at the executive leadership board. I mean, I don't need to tell you how to suck eggs. We all know that at this stage, but really challenging that, making sure that this is the responsibility of all stakeholders. So a collective movement from the bottom, from the top, and from the middle. Come at it at all angles. Don't just let it sit at one kind of level. We've taken quite a few different approaches through our wellbeing champion forums, our first aiders, focus groups. But what we've also done is we've decentralized the strategy. So absolutely, there's a strategy that's leading us over the next 5 years, but we've allowed local areas, due to our distributed nature, to come up with their own challenges and identify their own needs and give them the platform to speak about it. And we capture this in a maturity model. Psychological safety is also captured in that maturity model. to give leaders accountability for it. We can't hold people accountable without training them. So training people on what psychological health is and what psychosocial risks are, that's a big part of our strategy, awareness and education. Policy development. So we've developed a mental health charter, which aligns with the BITC mental health commitment and the Thriving at Work standards. We've also, as part of the standard, recognized that we should develop a psychosocial risks in the workplace policy. So we're talking about it, and we're also putting psychosocial risks into things like return to work. So now our return to work process acknowledges these risks. Our incident and accident reporting from a health and safety point of view also acknowledges these risks, so that we start to build metrics on these. I call them antecedents to absenteeism, because it's good to know that somebody's been off of mental health, but why? Is it demand? Is it workload? Is it pace of work, etc.? A couple of other things is organizational well-being risk assessments. So rather than looking at the individual, look at the organization and the systemic culture or the systemic behaviors. This standard is not about the individual, it's about the organization or the subcultures. Our organization has got subcultures because we've got Scotland, we've got down to Cornwall, and we acknowledge and recognize that. Consultation, really important. So our wellbeing champions are given the opportunity to bring risks to our discussions, and also are encouraged to have focus groups at site level in order for us to be able to talk about some of these things. But one of the places we did also really start is some of the campaigning, such as End the Stigma campaigning, storytelling campaigns, well-being conversation campaigns, giving them guidance on how to have a well-being conversation, and line manager guidance on how to manage psychosocial risks as well. So quite a lot there, but what I would just say, dive in. There's no right and wrong. We're all trying to figure it out. And if it doesn't work, that's part of the plan, check, act. I've got it wrong. But it's part of the process, because if we move to the next slide, where we actually implement what we've planned, we do what we need to do. We then move on to monitor and confirm. So some of the things that I've spoken about have been built into our internal audits, into our management reviews, so that we are talking about it and we are checking if it works. If it doesn't work, it's okay. Let's try something else. But if we don't try, we're not going to know how to improve and ensure this continual improvement, where we really take action. So it is all about taking action. And I'm conscious of the time. There was a whirlwind. So I'm going to leave it there. I've got any questions, but I think we're probably going to go into questions afterwards. So thanks, Naz.
How does reflective practice play a role in establishing this plan? Did you try something that didn't work?
I think that's a really great question. Thank you, Sarah. So part of obviously check in the Plan, Do, Check, Act is checking whether something has worked or hasn't worked. Personally, I've been in the role since October. So yes, there have been things that potentially you don't get as much good feedback on. And we're in a world, I feel, I don't know if anybody else feels, but we're in a world where we're constantly asked for quantitative measurement. And I push back and say, what about the qualitative measurement? What about what people are saying? What about people are feeling? So yes, some things don't work. And I think it's just about reflecting on that. What could have been done better? And I will honestly say sometimes it's that we haven't got buy-in from senior leaders enough is one of the biggest challenges